Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 475 Your Victory Over Amorality, Part 1. The Role of Compliance and Conformance in Establishing Your Spiritual Values. The podcast objectives are revisit how immorality attacks your boundaries, analyze the role of compliance in your victory over amorality, and analyze the role of conformance in your victory over amorality. To reinforce progress and power. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 327 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we concluded our analysis of the fundamental degree of reverential fear. Enter spiritual values. Now, although there is much more I could say about values, I must move forward with my current remit. To wit, I must show you how the 3 degrees of the fear of Elohim eliminate the 3 degrees of prejudice. And I will begin with spiritual values. To prove this matter, we should consider the table to the right, recapping what we have learned about values. The primary objective of values is to keep every matter in the right perspective, i.e., aligned with the Father's perspective. And by definition, to value is to consider with respect to worth, excellence, usefulness, or importance, to regard or esteem highly. Now, the key to defeating the spirit of immorality lies in the definition of values and its primary objective. And I will capture it in the form of an interest point. Consider this. Whereas values cause you to keep every matter in the right perspective, amorality causes you to have inaccurate perspectives due to a lack of boundaries. No doubt, the variables of interest are boundaries. To wit, your values are designed to reinforce the boundaries of the Father's will, vis-a-vis the standards of compliance and the rules of conformance, both of which are required to keep you in the way of holiness. On the other hand, amorality is designed to eliminate these boundaries via suppression of the rules and suspension of the standards. And should he succeed, you will be hit with the following reality. By removing the boundaries of the Father's will, amorality will not only cause you to forsake the way of holiness, my dear friends, this foul spirit will open you up to transacting a wide variety of sins. Now, this should not be too hard to understand if you are following the linear model of holiness and you remember what we have already learned about compliance and conformance. If you don't, allow me to remind you. The primary illustration of compliance in your quest is an elastic suit, and its primary objective is to cause you to fall in line with all the standards of holiness. Likewise, the primary illustration of conformance is a railway system that serves as a barrier between the way of holiness and the troubles of this world. Its primary objective is to cause you to follow every rule of holiness. Now, along these lines, compliance and conformance, which are degrees of obedience, go a long way in mitigating the impact of amorality prior to your mastery of spiritual values. Here is how. As amorality is designed to eliminate the boundaries of the Father's will, He will not get very far if you are walking in compliance and conformance to the Father's will. Trust me, it would take a lot to eradicate a railing system that circumferences the full breadth of the way of holiness. Likewise, it is a fool's errand to promote spiritual comfort and ease to a man who has constrained himself to the strict spiritual standards of the Father's will, and he wears it like an elastic suit. Now, the question we should chiefly entertain is, if compliance and conformance are formidable obstructions to the force of amorality, what role do your spiritual values play in your victory over amorality? The answer is sure, and it begins with understanding a key matter, which I'll offer as an inflection point. The quest for holiness does not stop at obedience. Quite the contrary, there are 56 additional degrees you must master to achieve perfection in the Ruach of Elohim. And thus, we conclude all the degrees of holiness and their primary illustrations are designed to reinforce all the progress you have made and all the powers you have unlocked. If we lose our life. Now, in the specific case of values and amorality, your values are designed, again, to reinforce the standards, rules, and boundaries you have unlocked via compliance and conformance. Here is how. Your values establish a spiritual connection between your heart and A, the standards that make up your elastic suit of compliance, and B, the rules that constitute the railing system of conformance. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this is one of the most amazing and brilliant illustrations of the linear model of holiness. And if you are wise, I suggest you listen carefully to this matter and take notes if you are led. Now, first of all, I would remind you that the fear of Elohim is the primary application of obedience. Ergo, the same rule applies to their secondary degrees. Ergo, the following is true. Spiritual values are the primary application of compliance. And as conformance is an evolution of compliance, spiritual values are also a primary application of conformance. What does this mean? Procedurally, it means that compliance and conformance are designed to unlock the power of spiritual values in your life. Ergo, where there is no compliance and conformance, there can be no spiritual values. Now, let's talk about values and compliance. And allow me to begin by restating the definition of compliance. By definition, compliance is the act of acquiescing, the tendency to yield readily to another in accordance or cooperation, the strain of an elastic body expressed as a function of the force producing the strain. Now, if you recall, we stated aforetime that the power of compliance lies in its firmness, which is why we liken it to an elastic suit. To wit, an elastic suit is firm by nature, and if you wear it, you will gradually adopt its firm nature. Notwithstanding, the firm nature of compliance is spiritually demanding. Trust me, it is uncomfortable, and it is meant to be uncomfortable. For obedience is the primary application of faith, and faith is a no comfort zone. For that reason, anyone who is not committed to the way of holiness will stretch out the elastic material of compliance, or they will take it off altogether. Remember, we are not forced to fall in line with all the standards of holiness. Quite the contrary, we must choose to fall in line. And many within this nation are choosing not to. Now, this is where values come onto the scene. And for your edification, I will restate its definition as I had done for compliance. By definition, to value is to consider with respect to worth, excellence, usefulness, or importance, to regard or esteem highly. Ergo, as values are the primary application of compliance, you, my friend, will begin to value the firm nature of the elastic suit. You, my friend, will respect all the standards of holiness, regarding them as excellent, useful, and important. Brothers and sisters, I truly hope you are seeing this, to wit, how critical your values are in this procedure. Remember, compliance is, and I quote, the strain of an elastic body expressed as a function of the force producing the strain. What does this mean? My dear friends, it means that the strain of the elastic suit of compliance is systematic. Vis-a-vis, there is a spiritual science to it, which is why it is expressed as a function of the force producing the strain. This is why I refer to it as a spiritual science, for the force producing the strain is the set apart spirit of Elohim, and he is producing the strain in order to eliminate every avenue of non-compliance in your life. For this is the only way you can walk in conformance vis-a-vis the primary evolution of compliance and the key to unlocking the power of transformation. My dear friends, you must remember this. Conformance is the primary driver of transformation. And where there is no conformance, there can be no transformation. This speaks to the primary illustration of values in your quest. Enter a spiritual values system. My dear friends, the key word here is system. And here is why this is so important. As the strain associated with compliance is determined by a spiritual system, the reinforcement of compliance must also be determined by a spiritual system. And as we have said before, the primary illustration of values in your quest is a spiritual system. Now, here again, your spiritual value system is designed to reinforce your commitment to walking in compliance by transforming you into a man or woman who A, values the standards of holiness, and B, is committed to wearing the elastic suit for the full duration of your quest. And this is why the primary objective of spiritual values is to keep every matter in the right perspective. Trust me, all the goats, dogs, and swine in our midst are perceiving the strain of compliance from the perspective of what they're losing and the immense pressure involved. On the other hand, all the true contenders for the seal of Elohim perceive the strain of compliance from the perspective of what we are gaining. Not only this, but we are persuaded that if we lose our life here and now, we will find it in the end and forever. Matthew 10:39 is revealing. He who has found his life shall lose it, and he that has lost his life for my sake shall find it. Maintaining the right perspective when you suffer. Now, that was a story on compliance. Let's now talk about values and conformance, beginning with a definition of conformance. By definition, conformance is an action in accord with a prevailing standard, attitude, or practice, correspondence in form, nature, or character, agreement, or congruity. Now, the critical factor of conformance is clearly agreement. To wit, the only way you can walk in conformance is by agreeing with the standard, which is Yahushua Messiah. For look, listen, it has been written, can two walk together except they be agreed? Ergo, as we walk in conformance to the Father's will, we take on his form, his nature, and his character. For where there is agreement, there will be conformance. Now, this is precisely why the primary illustration of conformance is a railing system that keeps us in the way of holiness. For this is the path to perfection. This is the path traveled by Yahushua Messiah, i.e., the standard and our example. Therefore, if you agree with him, you will never deviate from this path. For the spirit of conformance will prevent you from going astray, and it will keep you safe and secure while you travel in this narrow way. Notwithstanding, we are not forced to walk in conformance to the Father's will. And to remind you of how formidable nonconformance is, I ask you to consider the following interest point. Nonconformance is the primary spiritual deficit preventing men and women from becoming masters of their faith. My dear friends, you must believe me. The temptation to operate in nonconformance will be ever present for the full duration of your quest. Thus, seeing as it is a sore evil, your goal should be to mitigate this risk, lest your faith be in vain. Now, as you would expect, this is where your spiritual values come on to the scene. Here again, I will restate its definition as I have done in the prior section. By definition, to value is to consider with respect to worth, excellence, usefulness, or importance, to regard or esteem highly. Now, as values are a primary application of conformance, you, my friend, will value the boundaries of the Father's will, and you will take a huge step in transforming yourself into a disciple of Yahushua Messiah. For you will regard his standard as excellent, useful, and important. Brothers and sisters, I truly hope you are seeing this and how critical your values are in this procedure. Remember, conformance is, and I quote, action in accord with a prevailing standard, attitude, or practice, agreement, or congruity. What does this mean? My dear friends, it means that your conformance is demonstrated by your willingness to follow the steps of Yahushua Messiah and to adopt the spiritual practices required to achieve his example. 1 Peter 2:21 is revealing, for to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Now, here lies the inflection and the problem. Vis-a-vis, the example Yahushua left us involves suffering. That, my friend, was the inflection. Here is the problem. The majority of men and women within this nation don't want to suffer. And this is the most common aspect of Yahushua's standard that they don't agree with. Here lies an even greater problem vis-a-vis if you don't suffer for the master, you won't reign with the master. For look, listen, it has been written, if we die with him, we shall also live with him. If we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also shall deny us. My dear friends, you must believe me. This is one of the most common crossroads and a most prominent dividing line within our quest. That is, the juncture where we must make up our minds to suffer all things in conformance to his standard. Now, as I said before, this will be a challenge of epic proportion, and yet it will become immensely easier if you unlock the power of values. Here is why. As the primary objective of values is to keep every matter in the right perspective, you will never perceive the suffering involved in conformance as negative or an evil thing. Quite the contrary, you will perceive suffering as a net positive and a good thing. For the source of your spiritual value system is honesty and truth. And the truth is, the temporary suffering we endure in this life is nothing to be compared to what Elohim has in store for those who love him. Now, here lies the difficulty. To it, most of us know this and we appreciate it. However, when the test comes, we often lose sight of it. To it, we fail to maintain the right perspective concerning those things which we suffer. And this is why your spiritual value system is so crucial. Remember, it is a system founded upon the power of spiritual science. And thus, the following is true. When you unlock your spiritual value system, you will, by default, always maintain the right perspective. Always. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, this is huge. Imagine a reality where you always have the right perspective. Imagine a reality where you can endure all things because you always perceive the power and the progressive benefits of endurance. My dear friend, imagine a reality where you encounter a trial that is spiritually congruent to a fiery furnace. And imagine a reality where you close your eyes and you walk right on through. And at some point in the midst of the trial, you detect the presence of Elohim in the form of the Ruach, and he is guarding you. And this, my friends, is only the beginning and a small fraction of how your spiritual values defeat amorality. And we will continue this discussion in the next podcast. Until then, I encourage you to do whatever it takes to stay in the way of holiness. Trust me, our suffering down here is but light affliction. Not only this, but when you suffer for the sake of righteousness, this finds favor with Elohim. And if you want to finish this quest, you must value the favor of Elohim. 1 Peter 2:19 through 20 is revealing. For this is favor, if because of conscience toward Elohim, anyone endures grief, suffering unrighteously. For what credit is there in enduring a beating when you sin? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure, this finds favor with Elohim. Now, here is the final word. Your soul will never be freed if you and the master are not agreed. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this is the foundation of the conclusion of the whole matter. We know this because spiritual values are at the foundation of the fear of Elohim. Ergo, you will never fear Elohim, and you will never guard all of his commands if you have not unlocked the power of spiritual values. For in every other occasion, you will not find his commands as excellent, useful, or important. Here again, many of us agree with the conceptual model of his standard. To wit, we agree with the concepts of faith, obedience, virtue, the fear of Elohim, knowledge, wisdom, temperance, endurance, patience, joy, peace, godliness, meekness, kindness, mercy, and love. However, we often struggle to walk in the power of these 16 degrees of perfection because of the immense suffering involved. That is, procedural model of his standard. Here lies the inflection and the problem. To wit, many agree with Yahushua's standard in concept, but when it comes time to demonstrate his standard and to embrace the suffering involved, they are proving that they don't agree with his standard in practice. Now, that was the inflection. Here is the problem vis-a-vis salvation is not in concept. Quite the contrary. Salvation is in practice. To wit, we are not judged by what we conceive. Rather, we are judged by what we do. For our actions are evidence of what we truly believe. Heretofore, I recommend, if you truly believe in the standard of Yahushua Messiah, let your values do the talking. For the shortest path to endless death is the path you preach and yet are not walking. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 475, Your Victory Over Amorality, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 476, Your Victory Over Amorality, Part 2. I'll post this podcast on Monday, May 26, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.